Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menasce. This is the weekend edition where we interview notable people. From the world of real estate investing. Today is no exception. We have a great guest all the way from Los Angeles, California. Welcome to the show, Chad Zdenek.
Thanks, Victor. Glad to be on the show.
Well, great to have you here. Chad, you and I have known each other for a number of years and traveled all sorts of beautiful places around the world. But for the folks who don't know you, maybe give a bit of your backstory and how you got to this point in your journey.
Sure, no problem. Just real briefly, so I've kind of had three career paths. Started out technically as a rocket scientist working on the space shuttle main engines for Rocketdyne. Did that for 7 years as a structural dynamics engineer. And then I went and started a business with my brother, a lighting business, which I worked with him at it for 17 years. Grew that to be about 75 employees in 3 different warehouse locations, and then sold that in 2018 and went full-time into real estate as a real estate investor and a real estate syndicator. And I focus primarily on apartment buildings and self-storage properties in California and more recently out of state in Florida, Texas, and the Carolinas.
I love it. And you've also done some pretty interesting stuff with some cable TV channels as well.
Yes, I have. So as a side hustle, I host TV shows primarily in the construction, engineering, technical spaces. The last show I had was on Smithsonian Channel and National Geographic called Inside Mighty Machines. And basically they're 1 hour episodes and we'd dive into these giant machines, take them apart, demo them, and I would, work with the construction crews to figure out how they were designed, how they were built, interview a lot of people that helped create these machines, and just really had a good time learning about them through the demolition process. Although some of them, like the aircraft carrier episode or the C5 Galaxy episode, were maintenance episodes, but you learn a lot when you got to do a lot of heavy maintenance as well.
Fascinating. And I saw that aircraft carrier episode. It was a great episode, very interesting, looking at all the different things from the steam catapults to the now electromagnetic catapults. Fascinating stuff. And it's also, how has that helped you as a syndicator, if at all, just in terms of brand recognition? Has that helped you?
Not particularly, and probably just because I don't really promote it much. I do run into people that have seen the show or recognize me from different places, and that's kind of interesting. It's certainly a good talking point, but I've really kept the two pretty separate. So I still have a Hollywood agent who looks for work for me and submits on my behalf. So I guess living in LA, dealing with some of the Hollywood stuff is kind of fun. But it's definitely a side hustle for me. My passion really is entrepreneurship and real estate. So I have no problem putting most of my time into that.
So let's talk real estate. You've got a bunch of deals on the go always. I know that from having known you for a number of years. What are some of the things that you're working on right now, things that might be helpful for our listeners?
Yeah, so I was giving it some thought when you invited me to be on the show, something that would be interesting for your audience. And one of the things that I've had to do over the last 6 months or so is actually transition property managers on a 200-unit property that I have, multifamily property that I have in Orlando, Florida. And, typically it's really common for the onboarding process or offboarding process to be done at the beginning of a deal or at disposition. But this was unique because we actually did a mid-cycle transition, meaning we had to get rid of our existing property manager and move to a new property manager. And as you might guess, because it wasn't working out with the initial property manager. So there's definitely been a lot of lessons learned in that. So if we've got some time, I was hoping to dive into that a little bit and just kind of share what I've learned along the way and what we did ultimately to help make it be a successful transition. And I thought we might be able to dive into that if that sounds all right.
Absolutely. As I'm processing what you're saying, I'm thinking that there's multiple facets ranging everything from maintaining continuity and accuracy of financial records at one end of the spectrum to the physical aspects to the relationships with the tenants that have been perhaps formed over a period of time and now need to be reestablished, and probably a bunch of rocks to be overturned with all kinds of things, all kinds of surprises. And I'm guessing you're dealing with most, if not all of those, and then more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And it really starts even before the transition, like recognizing that you might need to make a transition is really something you got to pay attention to, right? So, how long, they always talk about like grabbing the falling knife, if you will. Like, how long do you want to stay with your existing property manager before you do make a shift, right? Even that decision, because it's going to be disruptive, right? Like a lot of the points that you mentioned will happen. And so you got to ask yourself, is it worthwhile to go through all of those issues and challenges and headaches for the sake of what you hope might be better on the other end? In this particular example, we actually hadn't worked with the new property manager. We had worked with the prior property manager, and they had done really well for us on other properties. The challenge was that they were trying to grow into this market, and they didn't quite have the experience in this market or the connections, the relationships. And that was one part of the problem that we kind of recognized early on. But a lot of the stuff like you can manage, you kind of deal with, you hope that they develop these relationships over time. But when you don't see the improvement, then you need to ask yourself, do you need to make a shift? The other issue that we had was, and this was a heavy value add deal, we actually accelerated the construction a lot faster than we had originally anticipated, just because the condition that we received the property in changed significantly after the due diligence period. So we were surprised when we took it over, had a lot more vacancies. So we actually went into heavy value add rehab mode and brought our own construction crew down and really accelerated that. The problem was we got ahead of ourselves in terms of construction, and the marketing department within that property management company couldn't keep up. And so there was a long lag time in leasing. And anyone who runs these value add projects knows that it's already a challenge to deal with the vacancies that you have that you're doing the construction on. And then when they're finished, and if you don't lease them up right away, that's an added challenge financially. That's where we were at. And one of the keys to a successful transition is one, early detection that you might need to do it. Not necessarily that you've decided to do it, but you might need to do it. And if you start to see those storms on the horizon, it's really helpful to start interviewing other property managers sooner and quicker, because that does take some time to make a good decision. And we had one of our GPs who was really kind of pushing this earlier than I was, in terms of, hey, we need to start interviewing these other companies. Things aren't panning out the way we want. My natural tendency is give people the benefit of the doubt and work with them and try to help them improve. And he saw the writing a little bit differently. And he said, Chad, he's like, we really need to start interviewing now. We don't have to commit to it, but we need to interview. And that really helped me get over the hurdle, if you will, saying, okay, well, we don't have to commit, but let's just get ready just in case. So it takes a lot of time to do that. But if you do that ahead of time before you actually need to, you're able to make a better decision. And that helped us out a lot. And in the end, we actually ended up having to do it, right? We had to make a shift. Like I said, it was a 200 unit property, mid rehab. It's like, it was really a tough time to do it. We're behind on our leasing, ahead on construction. And not to mention that we've had all these interest rate hikes and all these other challenges going on. And we had a bridge loan for this because this was a value add project. So
Sure.
There were a lot of challenges there that we had to pursue through or push through. We got there, but it was a lot of work. And I'm happy to go into more details if you'd like, but that's kind of in a nutshell that the front end of the work that had to be done.
Well, I've got some structural questions because we too are working with large national property management firms. And as always, the way these contracts get written, paying a fairly low property management fee as a percentage of gross rent, but you're carrying the direct staff on your own payroll. So they, in some sense, work for you, even though they're reporting into the property management company. Did you look at a scenario of changing out the local staff and maintaining the relationship with a larger brand that you already had the pre-existing relationship? Or did you simply come to the conclusion that that wasn't going to be a viable pathway?
Yeah, so the first thing we actually did before we made the decision to move property managers is we actually took over the marketing role from the existing property management company. So they had their own marketing department for leasing, and we felt that they weren't doing what they needed to be doing or doing it as well as they should be doing, considering how many units we needed to lease up. So we actually took over that entire function and really dove into it. I mean, we literally had 3 to 4 meetings a week, the entire GP team, and still working with the property management company, but little by little, we took over that whole department. And that, I'd say, was like the first domino to fall. And once we dove into that, we realized where some of those shortcomings were. The property management company did try to supplement with additional staff. They tried to swap out some staff, but they had their marketing department fell very short. So that was the first step that we did in trying to keep things moving along. As you can imagine, you do have to be somewhat diplomatic in doing something like that, because invariably you're going to be stepping on toes, right? People that are going to be taking offense and saying, oh, you're not appreciating my work, or I'm not doing good enough. Your expectations are too high, so on and so forth. So it takes a lot of communication to get through something like that. And for us, like I said, 3 to 4 meetings a week with the GP team and the property management company. We brought in the regional vice president of the property management company to meet with us twice a week. So we were communicating all the way to the top in terms of operations. Actually, it was the regional person was on site twice a week. And we were having those twice a week meetings with the vice president of operations. And this is a multi-billion-dollar company for assets under management. So it was a large company. And we went pretty high when you get to the VP of operations, who's meeting with you twice a week about your project. It helped to have that communication going all the way to the top, definitely in terms of the diplomatic side that I was talking about. But we started just taking their responsibilities away, doing it ourselves, and at the same time, evaluating different property managers who would ultimately be able to take over the entire project.
Fascinating. So if you were to go through this transition again, maybe give me the top 2 or 3 lessons that you would do differently.
Yeah, I think a big one is early detection. Even if you think you might not need it, just recognize that worst case scenario is you're just spending a fair amount of your time evaluating other property managers. You don't necessarily have to sacrifice the project at that point, or I guess rock the boat with your existing relationship with your existing property manager. But you need to start that process early, because you need to start that earlier than you think. Fortunately, we had, like I said, our other general partner that was pushing really hard for that earlier than I would have. So that was like a big lesson learned for me. Another lesson learned is not to worry about having to roll up your sleeves and really dive into it, right? I think a lot of, and it could be a curse for successful operators, thinking that you do such good asset management that you don't need to roll up your sleeves, right? You hire the right people and you manage at the asset management level the best you can, and blah blah blah. And if you're successful at that, great. But invariably, there's going to be issues that pop up. And I think it's important for operators to realize that, hey, sometimes they do need to dive into it, right? And grab the bull by the horns, roll up their sleeves, put on some, put the elbow grease into it, and take control of the project again. Don't feel that some of those tasks are beneath you, because at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to right the ship and do best by your investors. And sometimes that takes a lot of grunt work to get that done.
I love it. Well, Chad, I'm actually so grateful that we had this conversation, because I think there was a lot of gold in everything that you shared. If folks want to connect, if they want to learn more, what's the best way?
Yeah, best way would be either website CSQ, like challenge status quo properties.com, or anywhere on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn at CSQ Properties would be best.
Fantastic. Well, love the perspective. Sorry you had to go through that, but it's clear that you're probably grateful for the experience. And for the listeners at home, definitely connect with Chad Zdenek at csqproperties.com. And in the meantime, have an awesome rest of your weekend. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.